The Disruptive Fall of Journalism by John Mosso. In the world of 2020, objective truth has become a distant memory. News stories are often intentionally polarizing to evoke strong emotions from viewers and capitalize on market share. Exaggerations, half-truths, clickbait, and other manipulative tactics are rampant throughout both conservative and liberal news outlets. The source of this problem can be traced back to the fall of journalism, or disruption of journalism, that started at the turn of the century. This essay explores this issue by analyzing the story from academic articles and news articles with a particular focus on how each author defines journalism and disruption. It is concluded that while some authors better define the terms, all appear to trivialize the significance of what the fall of journalism represents. During the ongoing global pandemic this year, the story changes dramatically from news source to news source. Since the start of the year, some sources stated that the world was overreacting, while others stated that the world was underreacting. Regardless of the reality, the existence of these two separate perceptions is indicative of a global communication problem. When this occurs, misinformation and conspiracy theories increase in frequency and severity, much as occurred on COVID-19. This communication problem has resulted in global economic devastation that has left many businesses bankrupt, which is a common consequence anytime an industry, journalism in this case, undergoes disruption. Disruption is a business term that was popularized by Clayton Christensen in his 1997 book, The Innovator's Dilemma. Christensen defines disruption as how a new technology, concept, or strategy starts out as a non-competitor in the market it eventually disrupts. A rather famous example is how the streaming service Netflix disrupted the video rental industry, resulting in bankruptcies of companies like Blockbuster Video. In his article, Breaking News, Christensen applies this concept of disruption to the field of journalism and presents various strategies for news businesses to avoid similar outcomes as what happened to Blockbuster. Breaking News is co-authored by David Skock and James Allworth, and it is presented in a neutral tone and language. The authors present their argument well by using historically known examples of disruption to explain what is occurring in journalism. By clearly defining the fall of journalism as a classic case of disruption, the authors alter the significance of the problem. Kent Lewis outlines in his book Warden World how different definitions can drastically alter what they seek to define. By clearly stating that the field of journalism is in a state of classic business disruption, Christensen and his co-authors make it clear that the consequences to journalism will likely follow the same trend as other disrupted industries like video rental. However, the article appears to trivialize the consequences, or it would explore communication issues that can occur when the truth journalists are supposed to convey is heavily disrupted. Further evidence of the state of disruption in journalism is explored next. Alex Williams interned at the Pew Research Center and shares the results of his journalism findings in his article, Measuring the Journalism Crisis, Developing New Approaches that Help the Public Connect to the Issue. In it, Williams defines journalism as being in crisis, and does not appear to be aware that the crisis is caused from the ongoing disruption. Although Williams states that there are known problems of misinformation and sensational news articles in journalism, his article appears to trivialize the fall of journalism. This is made evident when Williams explains that job losses in journalism account to 40% in 8 years, and he does so with a lack of connotative language, which would help manipulate the perceptions of the audience. The need for this emotional manipulation becomes necessary when one considers the ramifications of a 40% job loss in under a decade in a professional field. Imagine the associated increased crime and disorder if this 40% job loss occurred in the field of police, or the infrastructure problems resulting from a 40% loss of city construction workers. What if 40% of nurses were laid off in 8 short years? What would expect the consequences of that to look like? When journalism is disrupted, the resulting consequences involve some news outlets mislabeling countries on world maps. While it appears Alex Williams and the other authors in this essay appear to explore the issue of the fall of journalism as mere curiosity, the significance of a 40% job loss in the professional field cannot be understated. The article, Journalism in Crisis, by John Russell, Peter Laufer, and Janet Wasko, is primarily focused on defining journalism to determine whether it is indeed in crisis. The article shares many of the same insights as Kent Lewis does on media. Overall, the article offers a neutral tone with the occasional use of connotative language, such as when it references Aldous Huxley's dystopia novel, Brave New World. While the article does an effective job at defining journalism, it also trivializes the crisis by not really answering its own question, other than stating that journalism is in crisis at the end of the article. As well, while it appears that Laufer et al. Intuitively are aware that the crisis is being caused by disruption, such as when they mention bloggers and startups altering their journalism model, they never define it as disruption nor reference Clayton Christensen's work on the subject. Conversely, Jill Lepore is familiar with Christensen's definition of disruption and argues against its validity in her article, The Disruption Machine. In it, Lepore provides examples of failed disruptors, such as Morrison Knudson's failures with MK Transit and MK Rail, and Time Incorporated's failure with the new media venture, Pathfinder. This illustrates Lepore's misunderstanding of the definition of disruption since, based on the brief evidence provided, both of her examples are great examples of failed strategic management and not examples of failed disruption. Lepore then goes on to state that journalism cannot be disrupted since it's not an industry in that sense, and that the press has generally supported itself by charging subscribers and selling advertising. In this case, it appears Lepore has difficulty defining journalism as a business or a public service. However, as mentioned earlier, job losses were almost cut by half in under a decade, which would strongly indicate that journalism is subject to the same challenges that can occur in business organizations, which includes disruption. Overall, it appears Lepore has a strong bias towards being one of the sole critics of a widely accepted business concept, made evident when she states as much at the start of her article. Adhering to the theme presented within this essay, the article, The Future of Journalism, begins by exploring the disruption occurring within the field of journalism, but then dismisses the very idea it represents. Once again, Clayton Christensen and his work on disruption are not referenced, suggesting that the authors either felt it unnecessary to credit his work, or are unaware of his work. If the latter is the reason, it calls into question the thoroughness of the research performed by 9 separate academics, when the author of this paper performed mere cursory research to complete this assignment. One questions at which point the state of the current crisis in journalism moves from mere curiosity in academia to one that is made known to the general public so that the problem can be corrected. Allen et al. Appear aware of the potential severity of the problem when they state that the current disruption threatens journalists, businesses, and the public. However, the language and focus of research indicating this style of global threat should do more to highlight these potential consequences, should they not? Instead, about a third of the future of journalism explores opportunities that can be exploited rather than attempting to raise awareness of the crisis. Once again, this is indicative of a complete lack of understanding on the definition of disruption. It also presents another example of the nuances posed when defining the role of journalism in a constantly changing world. In Chapter 7 of Ward and World, Kent Lewis suggests that journalists turn the 2003 SARS epidemic into a media event. This makes one wonder if Lewis would say the same thing about COVID-19. After all, there is research suggesting that COVID-19's death rate is lower than SARS. In this case, it appears Lewis misunderstands the definition of exponential growth and how this relates to epidemics. Prior to the disruption of journalism in 2003, the story of SARS was successfully communicated and the epidemic was largely contained with 495 global deaths. 17 short years later, the next outbreak was poorly communicated by a field of professionals severely impacted by disruption, and the world is getting a glimpse of what SARS could have looked like if it happened today. The last article to be explored in this essay is an article by Margaret Simons called Journalism Faces a Crisis Worldwide, We Might Be Entering a New Dark Age. As should come as no surprise by now, Christensen's disruption is not referenced in the article, even though Simons discusses many points of disruption, such as how the ad revenue model has dramatically changed when she states that 90% of all ad revenue in the Western world is generated by Google and Facebook. Ironically, Simons' connotative use of Dark Age in her title is the exact type of clickbait journalism that is predicted by Christensen's disruption model. Although the author of this paper thinks Dark Age is a rather apt term to use now that social distancing and surgical face masks have become the new normal in 2020. In this paper, 6 separate articles exploring the ongoing crisis in journalism were examined. It was decided that while academics and journalists do appear to realize that journalism is in crisis, the method they employ to define the problem and its consequences trivialize the significance of the issue. In the past, governments and businesses have often been accused of disrupting the truth to produce their own version of reality for their own gain. However, this always occurred on a nationwide scale. The question the reader should ask themselves is what exactly happens when the truth is disrupted on a global scale, while academics, for the most part, have no idea of the significance this represents and the magnitude of the potential consequences. Every single news outlet, conservative and liberal, is severely affected by the disruptive fall of journalism. If Huxley and Orwell were alive today, they would probably give the smuggest "I told you so" in history. Our world has sacrificed academic integrity and objective truth for emotional validation on social media outlets and polarizing entertainment and journalism. Fake news, anyone?